Hey everyone, I'm Stephanie, and I believe that all readers should read children's literature, especially adults. So that's what we do on the Kid Lit Love podcast. We celebrate all things children's literature, picture books, early readers, middle grade, and young adult novels too. Whether you're an adult reading to your inner child or connecting the young readers in your lives with fantastic books, you've come to the right place. Each week, we'll talk to a different children's literature author and discuss their books, their hopes and dreams for readers, their writing process, and much, much more. So, grab a notebook to build your TBR, and let's get to today's episode of Kid Lit Love. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Kid Lit Love podcast. I'm Stephanie, your Kid Lit loving host, inviting you back for another weekly conversation with a children's literature author. Today, I'm talking with Rob Renzetti, the Emmy award-winning animation veteran who has worked as a storyboard artist, a writer, a director, and producer, and is the author of multiple books for children, including the #1 New York Times bestselling Gravity Falls, Journal 3 with Alex Hirsch, Onward, Quests of Yore, and The Horrible Bag of Terrible Things. He's here today to talk about his newest book, The Twisted Tower of Endless Torment. It's a little bit of a tongue twister, and with a title like that, I can't wait to get started in our conversation. So, Rob, welcome to Kid Lit Love. I'm so glad you're here today.
Hi, Stephanie. Thanks for having me here. It's a pleasure to talk with you.
Oh, I am all excited. I want you to start at the beginning because you have a really cool backstory. There are things you are going to mention that people probably know from watching on TV, let alone reading your wonderful books. So could you kind of rewind for us and tell us how'd you go from there to these beautiful books and middle grade horror, technically, right? Is such
Yeah.
an interesting genre. Um, I would love for you to just tell us how you got here.
So are you, because you said go all the way back to the beginning. I'm like, do you want since I was born or no, since I moved from animation to authorship? Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah, how about what made you make the leap into writing books for kids? And to do that, you probably have to talk about that part of your world for a little bit also.
Yeah, well, I started off, I've always since I was a kid, that's what I wanted to do was be in animation. Since pretty young age, I started drawing at a pretty young age. Thought I wanted to be in animation from a very young age. And luckily, just as I was kind of coming to the point where I had to force myself to work for a living, the animation industry kind of went through a rebirth, went through a renaissance. So I got a job. I've had a very successful career for a very long time. I started out as a storyboard artist, like you mentioned. And storyboard artist is kind of a weird thing that people really don't necessarily understand what it is. It's kind of like being it's kind of like being an author, but also being an artist at the same time. It's like you see the comic strips in a newspaper or a comic book that you buy in the stand. It's basically doing a longer version of a comic book. Basically, it's panel by panel. You describe in pictures what a cartoon should look like when it's animated. You're not animating yourself, but you're kind of describing, like, we're going to start on this building, and in the next scene we're going to see these two dogs, and the little dog's going to do this, the big dog's going to do that. And I mentioned those two specifically because Two Stupid Dogs was the show I got hired to be a storyboard artist on. It's the first show I ever worked on here in LA. So I kind of started out being a writer, but just kind of an invisible writer, meaning my words wouldn't end up on a page anywhere. They would end up on the screen being performed by actors in the role of cartoon characters. But, the early shows I worked on also, they were what's called outline driven. So you kind of are given a premise, you're given a little bit of what the story should be, but you have to come up with a lot of the story beats and story structure yourself. So I've kind of been an invisible writer almost from the start of my career in animation. So, fast forward 20 some years later, I'm still in animation, and I decide I would really like to see my words on the page somewhere. And at the time I was working on Gravity Falls, the show, and the opportunity came up. Disney Publishing, because the show was produced by Disney. Disney Publishing wanted to do some spin-off stuff because the show had been a success, and they were going to do this. They want to do this initial book, and I kind of threw my hat in the ring to write that book. And that turned out to be Dipper and Mabel's Guide to what's the I'm gonna get the mystery and nonstop fun. I was gonna say horror. No, that horror and terror are in your titles, not in the Gravity
That's
Falls
later.
book. Yeah, that's later. But so and then after that, Journal 3, I co-wrote with Alex Hirsch. So I kind of Disney kind of had this kind of smooth transition, starting to write books that were based on TV shows that I was involved in.
Mhm.
And so all the books that I did Disney Publishing were like that. I did 4 books. The one you mentioned was related to a Pixar movie. I did one that was kind of based on DuckTales, which is old property that Disney brought back, involving Uncle Scrooge and Donald Duck and their nephews. And by the way, Carl Barks, who kind of created Uncle Scrooge, my favorite comic book artist of all time. I obsessively collected those comics when I was a kid. So that was also kind of a joy for me to work on that project. But all this time I knew I wanted to do my own original story, and that's kind of how I eventually found my way to The Horrible Bag.
Okay, I have questions because I think you made a big jump at the end, wanting to write and then made your way to The Horrible Bag of Terrible Things. The Horrible Bag of Terrible Things, and the book that we'll talk about that is your newest book, The Twisted Tower of Endless Torment. I want to make sure I get that one right. I can see now, talking to you and knowing a bit more about your backstory, how this book is so immersive. Like, this is like playing a movie in my mind. I thought, I can see the stitches. I can see the fingers going into an ear canal and digging out some earwax. It's like my favorite creature in the book. So you
Yeah,
you
mine
went
too.
from, this Disney world to this other world.
Yeah.
And so I'm just so curious, why this genre?
Well, I'm going back to my childhood again. I started out as a real scaredy cat when I was a little kid and avoided anything scary at all. But there was one point where basically I flipped. And I've told this story before, but briefly, I was in middle grade and I was in the hospital because I had this weird condition, and I was waiting to have surgery. And my mom brought me a collection of Edgar Allan Poe's short stories, and I'd never touched anything in the horror genre before. But like, out of boredom and desperation, this was back when the television in the hospital didn't work so well, and even if it did, there were only like 3 channels really you
Right.
could watch. Um, I started reading these stories and fell in love with them, and that was kind of my gateway horror drug.
Wow.
From there, I kind of started watching Hitchcock films, which is not really horror, but kind of tension, terror, anything with suspense, mystery, horror. I started consuming at an increasing rate, and I've been basically been a horror fanatic ever since. Now,
Wow.
in animation, you don't get a chance really to scare kids too often. Mostly you're doing comedy or action shows. Gravity Falls actually is an exception to that rule. There are a lot of monsters in Gravity Falls. There are a lot of scary episodes of that show that we did. And that really whetted my taste for more, trying to do that kind of thing. But the opportunities to do that in animation are limited. That was basically the only kind of show I'd ever worked on that had any kind of horror bent to it. So I've always loved making kids laugh. I decided I wanted to make kids cry or scream in terror or at least get chills. So I felt like writing a horror middle grade book would be the way to go. It would give me a chance to kind of unleash that part of
Yeah.
my personality that I haven't had a chance to express so much in cartoons.
Well, it worked on this adult reader too,
Oh,
Rob.
good.
It definitely did.
I hope so. I'm trying. I don't think you should ever talk down to kids. I also don't think you should ever scare down the kids, meaning I think you should make things scary. And the kids can decide whether it's too scary for them or not. They can always close the book.
Yes, they could. That's right. They could
I hope
always.
they don't. I hope they don't, but they always could.
I was gonna say, I think, knowing I could, the plot, the way the story, well, I already mentioned it's for me, I could really imagine like being in that world, as I said, all the different things and creatures, and some interesting to try to picture exactly what they might look like. But you
Yeah.
also have, this deeper storyline about sibling, if we look across the books, there's sibling relationships, there's friend
Yeah.
relationships, perspectives about different events, learning about yourself as a person as you're going through these really crazy, feeling unbelievable kinds of things. So I feel like as a reader, you've got the horror aspect that'll hook some readers,
Yeah.
right? But you also have these other deeper threads that hook others, and combined, it's a really great synergy that I don't usually read horror as an adult or as a kid, but this I was like, "Oh, okay, I can do this one. I can imagine what this looks like." It was a fun experience, fun slash scary
Well,
experience.
good. I'm glad. Thank you very much. Thank you for saying all that. Yeah, no, it was important to me that something be going on with the characters as well, that it not just be that they're not just witness to a bunch of scary stuff that I think
Right,
is cool, because I don't think that's makes for the most enjoyable reading experience or watching experience. All the shows I've worked on, most of the shows I've worked on, yes, they're cartoon characters. Things are simple. There's lots of gags and whatever, but there's usually some sort of character, some kind of
right.
core character thing, even if it's just like, I don't want my sister to find out that I'm the one that killed her hamster. You know what I mean? It doesn't have to be
Yeah,
super deep. It doesn't have to be Tolstoy. It doesn't have to be anything epic, but like some kind of character hook where you are invested in what the characters, if you are care about what the characters care about, then I think you are more likely to have a deeper reaction to the whole thing, and to stick with the story and to be more interested in it. There are things going on between Zenith, who's my main character, and his sister Apogee, and that is really the core of the whole series. It revolves around their relationship. It there in some ways none of this would have happened if it wasn't for the fact that they're brother and sister, and the way they care for each other and look out for each other.
yeah.
So without spoiling anything, I won't say anything more, but yeah, the sibling dynamic and the brother sister relationship in the book is really the core of everything. And if some scary thing didn't support that story, I would toss it out. I wouldn't keep it just because I like, you know, something that's cool or scary. It's got to relate back to the characters and be important to the underlying story between them.
Yeah, and the reader can really feel that. I as a reader could really feel that. But I feel like without giving spoilers, I want to give a little bit of information for listeners who might not
Sure.
read either book yet. So do you want to give just a little overview? I feel like we have to start with the horrible bag of terrible things, just a little bit, and
Yeah.
then leading into your newest book, which is the Twisted Tower of Endless Torment. I feel like I always have to say that slower. That tongue twister gets me every time, and I don't.
There's three T's in that title.
Oh,
Horrible Bag of Terrible Things is easier because their sounds aren't the same. But yeah, no, my publisher insisted that we follow the model of the first title with the second. So
yeah,
that took me a while to come up with. But actually, my wife came up with Twisted in front of Tower. Tower was always going to be there because there's a tower in the book. Anyways, let me give you. Okay, I'll try and give a brief overview. So the
yeah,
Horrible Bag of Terrible Things. The title is literal. There is a horrible bag. There's a very repulsive looking bag that shows up on Zenith Maelstrom's doorstep. And he's a curious kid. He's a curious kid who's been grounded for the beginning of the summer. So he's just desperate for anything to do, desperate for something unique to come along. And this horrible thing comes along and he unwisely opens it up. And unwisely, because when he pricks his finger on the clasp, he feeds the bag blood, and that brings it alive and opens a portal to another world. And out of that portal comes this weird spider hairball thing that he dubs a schlurp because of the schlurpy noise it makes as it gets all sticky and kind of goes scrambling around his house. Eventually kidnaps his older sister Apogee, drags her inside the bag, which doesn't make any sense because it's not that big. But then he discovers the portal, learns that it leads to this crazy world called Grabog, which is a grab bag of things. There's lots of weird, disparate creatures in there, including a gargoyle named Kreeble that he makes a deal with.
this is my favorite, by the way.
Yeah, I love Kreeble. Kreeble is my favorite as well. She's a lot of people's favorites, and I love her dearly. So she becomes his guide to this world, and basically he goes on an odyssey to try and discover what happened to his sister. He does. He finds her. He rescues her in some way from this big nasty monster who I won't talk about, but
right.
who's scary and weird and creepy. And they get out of the bag, but there are consequences. Things have changed, not just in Grabog, but in their own life and in their own relationship. And Apogee is not happy with these changes. She doesn't really care about Grabog, but she's not happy with the changes that have occurred in her own life. So in the second book, she's already extracted a promise for him to go back to Grabog. And he agrees. But for some reason, he can't remember. He starts forgetting that they even went. Every time he falls asleep, he forgets the whole thing. And then if he sees the horrible bag again, it all comes back to him. So the horrible bag itself acts as like a memory jolt. But Apogee never forgets because she makes sure she doesn't. And so she's getting frustrated with him. And eventually, after he keeps putting her off and saying, "Oh, we'll go in a little while. I need to plan a little bit more." And he's like, "No, we have to go now." Eventually, she loses patience with him after he forgets yet again, and she goes into the bag on her own. So now he's forced to follow her, whether he feels prepared or not. And he does. And he finds out that now, due to what they did in Grabog the last time they visited, they are now wanted criminals. They are the most notorious criminals in Grabog. There are wanted posters or wanted sculptures, more accurately, with Zenith's head on them, all around. And these wanted posters actually come to life and can see him, and they betray him, even though the image looks like him. They betray him. Anyways, I don't get lost in the weeds, but basically they are criminals, and he has to try and catch up with Apogee before both of them are caught and sent away somewhere. And I can keep going on, and you can guess that the Twisted Tower is somewhere that he does visit. I will spoil it and say that he is caught, because that happens in the middle of the book, and he's sent to this tower, which is this kind of strange, weird, otherworldly prison that doesn't really operate like any kind of prison you've ever heard of before. And there's all these weird traps and these weird puzzles, physical puzzles. I was heavily inspired by MC Escher. If your listeners know that artist, if they don't, they should look him up. But he does all these crazy, perplexing black and white drawings of basically spaces that can't exist. Stairways that look like they work one way and then they work the opposite. Like it looks like you should be able to walk up them normally, but then you see a figure in his drawing that's walking down them on the underside, and lots of other weird stuff. That was my huge inspiration for the Eternity Tower, which is also the Twisted Tower of the title in the book. So Zenith, he meets some old friends. Kriebel rejoins him on the second adventure. He meets some old adversaries, but lots of weird new stuff. And he happens to him in weird new locations he's never been to before.
That was perfect.
Okay, good. I'm glad.
I can tell you the author of those books, because I thought, how is he going to talk about the first book and kind of a very unexpected surprise that happens at the end that leads into the second book, and then that very unexpected surprise, at least for me, at the end of this book as well. It's like that sibling dynamic is, as you said, a very big part of the book, and
Yes,
with some cliffhangers for sure.
yes.
Across both of those. I so enjoyed, as I said, trying to imagine what this place could actually look like with all of these things. And I said Kriebel was my favorite. In fact, it was just a couple of days ago. One of my kids had a head cold and was super stuffy, and is like, "Oh, my ears are plugged." And I go, "Oh, you need Kriebel." He's like, "What are you talking about? What are you talking about?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'm gonna give you a book, and then you will know what I'm talking about." And it just made me smile, especially when I can kind of surprise a teenager. It's a nice feeling.
I'm glad to hear it.
How do you, or how did you, I should say, kind of imagine this world and bring it to life so vividly for a reader? I mean, I know your words are what really bring it to life, but how did you get this world in your head, first of all?
Step by step. It's one of the reasons I called it Grabog was to give me the license to do whatever I wanted to do and put whatever I wanted to put in there. But also the fact that it was inside of a bag, and that this bag is kind of this weird sewn together. It's a bunch of different weird animal pelts sewn together, and it's really disturbing looking thing. But the idea that it was sewn together, that gave me kind of a theme to kind of riff off when we get to the actual world, which is that there are those stitches and seams in the ground of Grabog. It is a stitched together world, and so that led to certain things. Kriebel's just Kriebel. He's a gargoyle. She's a gargoyle. It doesn't really have anything to do with that theme. But like the second major creature we meet, Raggedy Albert, which is a giant 8 foot tall living rag doll. That's something else that is stitched together. And so that kind of theme was something that I returned to again and again. The color, the kind of the operating, the central engine of this world in a way, the collectory, which is it looks, Zenith mistakes it for a tree, but it's actually a series of I can't think of the word now, but it's basically it's constructed out of threads and sewing tools, and so again, like that idea of something to do with stitches, thread, creation in that way, a different kind of creation, tailoring or clothes making. That became a prominent theme in the book. And that was just, a happenstance. It's just kind of me riffing off of the idea of the horrible bag. The horrible bag itself is the horrible bag of terrible things, actually a phrase that came from my wife. And it referred to a grocery bag full of old tax receipts and bills and stuff that we didn't want to deal with, that we'd shoved into the corner. And
I love it.
it kind of become a presence in our life. So she's great at making, she's a great phrase creator, and that was one of her phrases. And I just like, that stuck in my mind. I just put it aside and then kind of figured out everything from there. But
Wow.
yeah, that was kind of, the idea of like seams and stitching and tailoring, clothing, fashion. All the major places in Grabog are all the names of the cities and towns and stuff are also kind of based on that kind of thing. They go to a town in the second book called Threadbare, and they go to a government center called Binding. And so these, this kind of themes, though I branch away from it a little bit in the second book, it still is a running theme within Grabog.
Yeah. I feel like it needs to come to life on a television or a movie screen. I need to see
I
it.
would love for that to happen. Obviously being in animation, would love to do an animated version of it, or,
Yeah.
but if anybody came calling to do one, a live action version, I've certainly listened to any offers. But yeah, no, I mean, I feel like I am a very visual writer, and that comes from a career,
Right.
because eventually I was writing scripts where I had to describe, not only come up with the dialogue, but describe the action, describe the scenes and stuff. And so you kind of get that muscle trained to do that.
Yeah. And those are the books that I love handing to students and my own children. I used to work with little people. Now I work with adult teachers and children's
Mhm.
literature. But when you can hand them a book, especially a reluctant reader that perhaps hasn't found the book that's hooked them or immersed them or, made them catch the reading bug, so to speak, and you give them a book like this that is different and it's a little crazy and there's weird stuff going on and they can imagine it and feel it. I just used to love that look on their faces when they're like, "Oh, okay, a book like this." And I can imagine that kids just must devour this. They must love this world.
I hope so. I hope so. I hope they're devouring it.
Yeah.
I don't have any children of my own, so I don't have a direct experiment subject that I can experiment on. So I have to rely on tales from the outside world. I've heard a few.
Right.
I did do a podcast with someone last week who had given the book to her son, and the son was on the beginning of the Zoom to tell me how much he enjoyed my book. So that was a big
Oh,
thrill. That was a lot of
oh,
fun.
that's wonderful. That was the best part of working with kids as a reading teacher was just hearing them talk about books that just they loved and that impacted them. Oh,
Yeah, I mean, that was me. Like, what a joy to discover a new book or a new author you'd never heard about before,
yes.
and then realize, oh, they've done like 10 other books. Like,
Yes.
I mean, when I got that short story collection from Poe, I was like, read the first story. I'm like, how many more stories are there? How many
Right.
more times do I get to have the fun I just had?
Yes. You're right. That is a good moment when you realize an author that you just discovered has a backlist. Like, oh.
Yeah.
So we've got the horrible bag of terrible things, and there is an unexpected twist, I would say, at the end, leads right into the Twisted Tower of Endless Torment. And then at the end of that book, there's yet another twist. of
Yes.
unexpectedness. And so I can't let you leave without asking, is there a book 3? Is there something else
Yes.
that helped me,
Yes. I'm
have a full circleness to this?
Yes, yes, yes. Luckily for me, Penguin picked it up as a trilogy to begin with. So I've been planning the second and third book for quite a while, and I'm working on the third book currently. I don't think this title is official yet, but I think I can say that the working title is The Cursed Cloak of the Wretched Wraith.
Oh man, I'm gonna have to practice that one too.
Not quite as bad as the Twisted Tower of Endless Torment, but the Cursed Cloak of the Wretched Wraith is another tongue twister for sure. I guess you have to say these titles out loud. The average reader doesn't need to,
Right, that's
but
right,
you
that's
you
right.
do, you do. But yeah, the Wraith is a character that is appears in the second book and continues to be
Yeah.
a presence in the third book. And the third book wraps up the trilogy, at least for now. The adventures come to a logical conclusion where there's no cliffhanger,
That's what
so
I
to
was
speak.
wondering. Okay,
I
that's
didn't I didn't cliffhang on the last book, but there's a hint that things could, there's always a hint that of course it could continue.
right,
But their adventures are wrapped up. Zenith and Apogee come to some sort of resolution. Again, I don't want to spoil anything, but
right.
I think it'll be an interesting and worthy conclusion to the series. It deals with things we have not touched on before, and reveals a lot of secrets that and answers to questions both in their personal life and in Grabagi and history and what the future of Grabag might look like. So yeah, I'm working on draft 3 of book 3 as we speak. So I will
Good,
have that wrapped
good.
up and it'll be out next summer.
Okay, that's good because I was just gonna ask you when might that be? I know we're celebrating the release of this newest one that just came out in July, but my head is already, I need that next one because I need to know what happened and how it happened and how it's going to end. But I
Well,
also
you
like
will
knowing
you
that you're
will know.
putting in a little bit of the history of the actual, imaginary place too, because I feel invested. It may freak me out, but I feel invested in this place. So
Well, you'll go back a little bit into history. The actual origins of Grabag I have not revealed, and I don't know if I ever will. I know what they are, but I don't
yeah,
I don't reveal like how this whole thing came to be. But you get to hear a little bit about the history. You get to things widen a little bit in the third book in terms of like there are actually other lands, there are other realms as they are called, that we briefly touch on. So there's I'm trying to expand things and deepen things as I go, and give more give you more views and different perspectives on the land and that I've created. So it's a big vast place, and there's certainly more stories to tell in there. But for now, it's just these 3. And yeah, yes, you'll have to wait till next summer, unfortunately. But I think we're trying to time them to come out in the summer so that there's a little bit of a warm up to the Halloween season, because obviously the books are geared for spooky season. Even though I'm a horror fanatic and consume it, 12 months a year, I know some people kind of focus in on this kind of thing around Halloween. So that's kind of the idea.
well, that's perfect. I'm patient. I can wait, knowing that it's coming.
You got a lot of other books to read in the meantime.
Yeah,
But
and I
but yes, you have one more trip to Grabag for you.
good. And I love, what we just said, when you find an author and realize there's a backlist. We're talking today about The Twisted Tower of Endless Torment, but now listeners who that book is new to, they can go back to The Horrible Bag of Terrible Things and then wait with anticipation for the third one too. So I feel like we're doing that today and giving readers not just one but two, and then something to look forward to in the future, which is always fun as a reader.
Yeah, I agree. It's always, again, like you find a great book and you realize the series, there's 3 of them or 4 of them or how many more there are. I kind of went through that with the a series of unfortunate events, which was, definitely inspirational for me. I kind of listened to most of the audiobooks of those before I started writing The Horrible Bag, and I just loved those and was so excited that there were so many of them,
Yeah.
so many stories that I got to read.
Yeah. Ah, well, where can listeners find you online or perhaps on social media if they want to connect or just be up to date on the things that you're doing?
Well, I have a website. It's robrenzetti.com. And there's a little bit, it kind of goes over my career, not only in cartoons, but also books. Like I kind of touch on all the major parts of my career. And I actually have a newsletter. And if you are a fan of my old show, My Life as a Teenage Robot, that I created in the early 2000s, I've actually, through my newsletter, been telling a new tale with those characters, like a serialized story. I've been writing that at the same time I'm writing this third book, kind of celebrating, because my show premiered 20 years ago today. So not a
Wow.
lot of kids for today will know it, but the older fans know the show. And so I've been writing a serialized story over the past year, where a chapter comes out every 2 to 3 weeks. So you can sign up for that if you're a fan of that old show, or you just check me out. Or I'm most often on Twitter at Rob Renzetti, and I'm also on Instagram, but not there very often. I'm a ghostly presence there. I learned Twitter, and despite the ups and downs that it's gone through, I'm kind of sticking with it as best I can, because I'm too old to get good at another social media platform.
It's
I don't know
hard.
that I don't know about getting on the TikTok or whatever. I feel like I'm so far behind at this point. By the time I get there, everybody else will have
Yeah.
moved on. So,
Yeah.
I'm sticking with the Twitter for now. But
Yeah.
you can find me on Instagram as well if you look closely. And yeah, that's basically where you can find me. Um, I do respond to emails from fans. There's a contact me form on my website as well. So if you just want to contact me directly, you can. And I try my best to respond to everybody who sends me some sort of message. So that's about it.
Oh, that's wonderful. That was a big thing for me as a kid, except, the answers to my snail mail letters to the authors that I adored, had
Yeah,
to come in the mail. And now we've just got instant access to
I
authors
know, it's a
that we
brave new
admire.
world, right? I was the
Yeah.
same. I wrote at one point. I wrote into a bunch of comic strip artists that I admired, and I thought, like, for a while, I was like, oh, nobody's going to respond. And then, like, most of them sent me back a message, and actually, like, included some sort of drawing of their characters or stuff. It was a thrill to
Yeah.
hear from them. So I understand what that means to fans, and that's why I try to respond to any message that comes to me through my email.
Well, that's wonderful. I'll be sure to put in the show notes the links to your website, um, where they can sign up for your newsletter, along with at least your Twitter link. It's still a great place
Yeah.
for children's literature, I think. So I'm glad you're still there. And I'll also put links, of course, to the books that were mentioned, and especially the two that we really took a deep dive into today, so listeners can get their hands on them.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Stephanie.
Yeah, thank you. This is a great conversation. And listeners, thank you so much for listening to another episode of the Kidlit Love podcast. Thanks for listening to today's episode of the Kidlit Love podcast. You'll find links to all the books, resources, and ideas mentioned in the show notes at alitlife.com. And if you want more, you might like to listen to my other podcast called Get Literate. It's a podcast that explores all things books and reading, notebooks and writing, and everything in between to build a life you love. One more thing. If you love what you listened to today, please take a moment to rate and review the podcast, or take a screenshot of the episode and text it to a bookish friend. This helps the podcast grow and builds our bookish community of kid lit love. Thanks for listening.